But there's also, if we flip the lens and looking at Schitt's Creek, they had a loss of financial wealth. And, we can essentially, it's the same feelings of like isolation, grief, identity attached to the money. Like, who are you now without the money, to who are you now with the money? And equally for them, who were you with the money and the labels and the luxury, and now without.
Welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. This is a show presented by Heart and Solutions Counseling Agency. We release new episodes every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central and encourage you to batch up that laundry, put away the dishes, plan for the week ahead, or do any other task that might seem daunting while you give our show a listen. You might just be encouraged to call your therapist, connect with this week's guest, or seek out those services you've been considering for a while but haven't made the commitment to yet. If you are in the state of Iowa and are in need of mental or behavioral health counseling, give us a call at 1-800-531-4236. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson. I'm the president and founder here at Heart and Solutions, Mental Health Counseling and Behavioral Health Counseling in Iowa.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt. I am our vice president in charge of the behavioral health department. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are designed for people curious about counseling, but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
Our guest today is joining us for the fourth time on this show. You'll remember Mariah Hudler from the episodes Financial Therapy, Money and Mental Health, and Money Beliefs in Modern Family. We love that show so much, and it was so fun going through some of the episodes and some of the dynamics between the characters, talking about what we think their money beliefs might be based on the things that they've said and done on the show. So we're excited to do a little bit more of that today. Mariah is a financial therapist. She is a therapeutically informed financial coach with a history in mental health counseling. And Mariah utilizes holistic approaches to be able to connect what our brain knows for information with what our brain can actually process and experience, because those are such different things. We all hear money advice all the time, right? People are always saying, do this and save this. And sometimes we go, well, yeah, I know that, but how do I get myself to actually do that? And how do I make sure that when I'm doing those things that are supposed to be good for my financial health, that they're also not taking away from the other health aspects of my life? So welcome, Mariah. We love having you on the show. Thanks for coming back.
Well, thank you. Equally, I enjoy being here and the conversations we get to have.
Now, can you remind us about the money beliefs that you utilize in your practice? Because as we talked about Modern Family, it was so fun to be able to kind of think through those money beliefs with characters that we all kind of know. So can you run through those for us real fast?
Sure. There's essentially about 4 primary core money beliefs that we fall into. They could be conflicting. We can be in one or more of them. But the first one would be money avoidance. So this would be the largest amount of clients that I see, and probably, we can all see in ourselves in some capacity, especially as in like psychology, psychologists or social work tend to be money avoiders, not here for the financial bit, but more for the service, helpers. Then we have money status, which probably should just identify itself. It's very much about the new gadgets, keeping up with the Joneses, anything that's kind of shiny. It leaves us at risk for spending all of our money or, debt to be able to show our status to other people. Money worship is another one. And the difference between money status and worship is that money worship is about the power that money can have over us, this belief that if we just had more, if we just went to get more, then everything would be okay, rather than working on the intrinsic values of how we want whatever money comes to us to work for us. So that would be money worship. And then money vigilance would be more associated with a healthy, like financial health. And that would be, you're doing your budget and all your bills, it's coming in, what's going out, you're living within your means. But there can also be an extremity to money vigilance as well. And that's like extreme anxiety around spending money. A lot of us spend so many decades accumulating money, saving and saving, that sometimes transitioning to spending can be very challenging. So always watching the numbers. So yeah, primarily there's 4 core money beliefs that we could recognize in ourselves. And then I also recognize quite a bit with my clients.
Do you think people are a mixture of them usually, or people usually like focus heavily on one versus another? Or what do you usually see in your clients?
It's really interesting. I usually see clients will score higher in 2 of the 4. And typically it's money avoidance and money vigilance. So there's like conflicting messages in that. Like they're avoiding in some way, but then they also know, whether it be patterns or beliefs or things that they've brought with them through life around like maybe the importance of money or like what it means to the family. So like even though like they may not be financially healthy, they still might rate in financial vigilance. So it's like they are half truths, right? And they can be very conflicting against each other. But that the goal is to become balanced with all of these. So if you do rate higher, it's not a diagnosis. It's really more of an assessment and informational piece. And then, some education practices of how to kind of get balance between those.
Yeah. And what's so interesting, Mariah, for me personally? I mean, we met you in June of 2023 for the first time. And I remember you talking about the money beliefs, and I'm going, okay, which ones kind of feel like they resonate for me? And I remember thinking right off the bat, okay, money vigilance, right? Of course, that's me. That's like my whole personality. But you know what? As I'm thinking now, so we're recording this right now, May 2025. So we're almost 2 years out from the first time that I had heard this and kind of made that assessment of myself. And as I'm hearing it now, I'm going, you know what? Money vigilance, the vigilance part that I felt so strongly at that time, I'm feeling that less right now in my life. And the money worship part, I think in hindsight, thinking about myself 2 years ago, I didn't initially think like, oh, that's what I have. I don't think that's my core money belief. But now when I think back on it, with feeling less anxiety about money, and so the money vigilance piece, having I think a less hold of me in my decision making, and then I'm looking back in hindsight and going, you know what? I think I had money worship as a belief at that time. And that was the primary one because I thought if I can just do this, if I can just do this, it'll be okay, right? It'll solve this. And the things that I thought it would solve, it isn't going to solve, right?
Yeah.
Money solves problems up to a certain point. And once you've got your 4 walls, it really doesn't solve the other problems that we tend to think that money is going to solve for us. So it's just very, very interesting to me. I'm super excited about it because just in that 2-year period, the difference that I'm experiencing thinking about these core money beliefs then versus now, as humans, we're always evolving, we're always changing, and these things kind of level in different parts of our lives.
Yeah, Julie, I mean, you have always shared, which I love, about your own personal experiences. And I do remember, 2 years ago, how very focused you were on like what you were spending, where you were spending it, how much in the family budget, and like how important those things are. But to me, when I see that, like you had an engine that you were creating, right? And it was going to protect you. And like 2 years down the road, you've been feeding that engine through this budget and like sending your money to different places. And I can imagine you're seeing it starting to work for you. And that therefore then reduces that anxiety and that recognition of like moving from worship of like, like when I was talking about worship is like, the money has the power. I don't have the power for me to direct the money. Whereas I work a lot with my clients of like, no, we have systems and a simple framework we could put in and drive the money through there. And that will equal like financial health, but it does take some time. You have to like watch it, believe it, build this relationship of seeing these numbers, your net worth grow over time, sharing it with your partner, being on that road together to start to feel more financially confident.
Just very cool to think about how those things shift, right? Now our
Yeah.
beliefs change over time, and as we gain new perspectives. Very, very cool.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
That's wonderful. Well, so yeah, we'd love to talk about now. Last time we talked about Modern Family, and this time we're thinking about talking about Schitt's Creek.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Schitt's Creek and why it's such a great show to talk about different money beliefs.
Yeah, I thought it would be a great time to talk about sudden wealth syndrome. I've had just recently a cluster of clients that have come through that have experienced sudden wealth. And what is sudden wealth? It's just an unexpected receiving of, it could be a financial windfall, like financial transfer, like maybe an inheritance from, someone in the family passing recently. And yeah, it's something that most people are not expecting, and what they may be expecting it, but they may not know what the number is. So it creates kind of a destabilization of where they are in life. Like all of a sudden, all of this money comes to them. And so there's that, but there's also, if we flip the lens and looking at Schitt's Creek, they had a loss of financial wealth. And, we can essentially, it's the same feelings of like isolation, grief, identity attached to the money. Like, who are you now without the money to who are you now with the money? And equally for them, who were you with the money and the labels and the luxury and now without? And I think that show really, shows so well their journey as a family during the loss. And luckily, it was such a pure entertainment for most people because the characters were just very strong and so enjoyable and relatable to watch, even though what they were going through was a major life transition.
So you mentioned a lot of clients have come with like the sudden wealth syndrome. Can you kind of talk about like skills that are important to know and like they probably have no idea what to do with all this money. So like what should they be doing when they either like gain all that money or and vice versa when it comes to Schitt's Creek, like lose a giant sum of money as well and the skills that go along with that?
Sure. I think isolation is a big one of like like my current lifestyle to now my lifestyle's increased and now I don't feel as connected to people that I was hanging out with. So some of the values may have aligned more of like, we're working and we're doing these things and all of a sudden I might not have to work, so there's a piece of isolation. There's also could be like an impulsivity of like, well, I want to share it like immediately, or I don't want things to be different. So I'll just pay for things for everybody and like kind of that impulsive piece to make it kind of okay. Like nothing's changed. I think it's looking at your values around like lifestyle, right? Of who can you still be the same person, but with a new identity, like you're transcending into a different identity. So how can you do that authentically? So moving kind of not necessarily extrinsic for sudden wealth. I think for Schitt's Creek, they were so status oriented. They identified themselves with luxuries, lifestyle things, artwork. I mean, I remember Moira just like freaking out over like the artwork that was being taken, and they were kind of forced, once stripped of all of that, they really just had each other, and they didn't know how to relate to each other that well because each of them had solely identified themselves more in extrinsic. So over the seasons of Schitt's Creek, like you could see them come together more on the like figuring out their intrinsic values, and the dynamic of the family and the relationships changed. So it's not an easy process. It's not something that you can go in and fix. I mean, it's essentially financial trauma, and most people's financial traumatic response is avoidance or distraction, or I don't want to face what's happening here. It also brings up, for my clients with the sudden wealth, is where the money came from or how it originated, and does that align with my values? So say, for example, if the money was made in the oil, and like decades ago, we're moving to kind of fossil fuels and, like a kind of a more progressive, and now we have conflicting value systems. Like I now have this inherited money that was made in somebody true I don't necessarily believe in, but yet it's so steeped in my familial lineage. Like, how do I honor that? And then how do I honor myself?
Yeah, I think skills and identity, when there's a huge shift in wealth and it's sudden. So in Schitt's Creek, when they suddenly lost everything, and for those who come across in some way inheritance, sudden wealth, there's a shift in those skills, and sometimes that can really highlight the deficits of certain skills that we didn't need to have prior. So I'm thinking about when, as soon as you had said Schitt's Creek, I thought about Myra and David trying to fold in the cheese to make enchiladas, right? They did not know they're trying to make enchiladas, and they said, okay, the recipe says to fold in the cheese, right? You fold it in. Don't just fold it in, right? They didn't know what fold in the cheese meant. And for Myra, that was a big episode for Myra as a character, because it showed us who Myra was kind of throughout her lifetime, right? She was embarrassed because she didn't know about folding in the cheese when her parents, and when she grew up, they were making their own bread, and she grew up making their own meals from scratch, right? And she kind of felt like, I've lost that part of who I am, and I can't now pass on those skills to my children because I haven't needed to continue and practice and develop those skills. And so the thing is that for Myra, like, do we judge Myra in that episode for not having the skill of folding in the cheese? We kind of do because I mean that's what makes it funny, right? But at the same time, if we look at it on the flip side and we say, okay, well, if somebody is experiencing sudden wealth syndrome and they didn't have the skills before to open an IRA, they didn't have the skills before to budget out and do their taxes, which have become much more complicated, right? They haven't had the skill of doing any of those things because they haven't had to. Well, now we go, well, would we judge that person, right? And so it is the same in both directions. It's just the skills that when I lived in Massachusetts, right, I wasn't driving my car like I do now, right? So I had a lot of skill in how to use the subway, and not as much skill and practice and time behind the wheel of a car. Now that I live in Iowa, I'm only riding in my car. And when I go to New York or Massachusetts, right, it's like, oh man, how do I get around this city on the subway, right? So we have these skills that we kind of develop based on our situations and what we need to be doing in those situations. And I think it's so easy for us and others to judge the lack of those skills when they're presented. And I think having a sudden windfall of, hey, I won the lottery, or I've had this inheritance come to me, it's a situation where now there are all these skills that I didn't even know I didn't have. And I haven't had the time to gradually build them up in phases as I go forward. And it reminds me too of, I was thinking about when David got a job at what was it, the dress barn or something. Yeah. And he got a company car to drive around, right? To drive back and forth to work. And when you were saying how it can feel like Well, now he felt like, oh, I need to isolate, right? Because all the family was like, well, here's the rotation for our car. And he's like, no, no, this is my car. I need to take this to work. That's the point of it, right? And how the family had gone through all these different phases where when we first see them, they're in their mansion with all of their art, and they have no reliance on each other. And then we see them get to a point where they have to rely on each other. And then when David gets the car, there's this shift where now we're going back a little bit more towards independence, because now he's gotten a job, and he has these things that the family needs, and the family is still in that, like, we're all in this together, every dollar that we get is for the family. And then we see that independence kind of shifting again. It's very interesting.
Yeah, each of them, move towards like what, like Johnny was very much about like structure and control. Like, he needed that to feel like grounded. And Moira was just, so long in a denial, space, and like, very fantasy oriented. And luckily, David was such a great character, and like just used sarcasm as a lot of, and detachment. Really kind of wanting to be independent and autonomous from his family as fast as possible. And you could kind of see like it just wasn't going to happen. Like he had to come back into the fold because they needed to do it together, but they didn't know how to do it well. And then Alexis, like very much, used her charm. It was really a connector in a lot of ways by doing that. So yeah, each of the characters. And I remember one, I always love this one when David used like went in the creative path, and he was, very entrepreneurial and like always trying to figure out different ways. Like, I'm not going to just kind of do this job. Like, I still need to be myself. And then with the opening of the apothecary, he was quite fantastical as well. It's just like, well, I'm just going to write that off, or we're just going to write it off. And like, Johnny's like, write what off? And he's like, write it off. Like, we don't have to worry about it. And he's like, well, where do you think the money comes from? And he's like, well, I don't know, but, we just write it off. Like, it's just going, and then Johnny's like, no, like, we don't write it off. The money comes from the business. Like, so I thought that was such a great thing of like, yeah, we'll just write it off. Like everybody talks about writing it off. And as you said, like with these skills, is like you enter into it being like, okay, this will be my way out. But there's like a huge journey in between that, like the skill building and understanding and the education. And yeah, it's funny.
And I was thinking of the write-off thing too, because yeah, I mean, I guess if you have never experienced that, you're like, you don't know what that means. I'm just going to write it all off. That's what you do. That's a word we've all heard, but don't really know what it means at all. When looking at the characters and how they like kind of handled like losing that money, can you kind of explain like which money beliefs you think each of them might have, or do you think they're all pretty similar in like avoiding it, or what do you think they went through in that?
Well, I mean, I think they, as Julie talked about, like changing evolution of beliefs over time, but a lot of them did settle quite into the status, like money status, and that was what suited them, and that's what they built their life on, and how the kids grew up. Where when the loss happened, I think that they went into more of an avoidance, like kind of that grief, right? A grief thing, like not believing it, waiting for things to change, just kind of that bargaining of like, it can't be happening. Like, we can't be doing this. And I think, over time, those beliefs, like it took them time to develop and change, from that avoidance, but essentially most of them stated that for the majority of the time. But it was very entertaining for us to see how each of them were pushed and challenged in their own ways. So, yeah, I mean, I'd say that they were in a money avoidance, but then they were building through like money vigilance. Like, it was like almost being peeling back the onion and starting from ground zero. And within that, they move from that extrinsic to intrinsic. Like, how are we going to spend the money that comes in? Because there's four of us and we all have to be able to survive. And, that interreliance and building interpersonal relationships and trusting each other. So, yeah, I mean, and I think, like worship comes in there as well, where you start to see like, okay, well, money is the answer, but then, how much money is actually needed. And by the end of it, we see, their transformation of their relative, like, income status is much different from what it was, but yet they had much more happiness as a family, as part of the community, giving back, like being connected. They became rich in other ways. And I think that that was a nice, the show showed that quite nicely about, going in there and feeling so isolated. I don't know how to relate to anybody. I mean, I think the first show where they're driving into the town and it looks like, some barren town and like tumbleweeds. And it's quite ominous, right? It's just quiet. There's just not a lot happening. So different to the initial scenes of just like opulence and luxury. And yeah, so.
Yeah, and I think, they all had to have some piece of money worship because of the amount of loss of identity that was felt when the money was gone. And so if you've got money worship kind of as one of those core beliefs, then when the money is gone, then our ability to take care of ourselves, right, is gone. And I think that that's been such a great progression through the show too, because in the beginning it was that that kind of like hole poked in that money worship, and I'm like, well, that's not an option now. And seeing the skills develop, knowing that Johnny had built that video store from scratch, right? And then he utilized those same skills to upgrade the motel and expand the motel. That Alexis decided to go back to high school and get her degree, and then go back to college and work towards her degree there. And she had the skills there available, and I think that the ability to practice those skills, to utilize those skills, they hadn't had those opportunities before, or the need to do that. But once they did do that, and then Moira, rebuilding her acting career, and David or opening the store, the more skills that they realized that they had, the less they needed to rely on money and have that money worship, in terms of the money is the power versus we are the power. Our skills are the power. Our ability to try to expand the motel and then fail completely, and then try to expand it again and fail completely, right? And then keep going with that, right? To go to New York and get turned down by investors. That process, that determination, and those skills really were kind of that antidote to the money worship that they had that really led to a lot of that that shame and that loss and that grief that they were experiencing in the beginning, because in the beginning it was, well, we have money and so therefore we're okay, right? And at the end it was, we've got skills and so we will be okay. There's another term in finance that is high income, not yet rich, right? But even farther than that, is high skill, not yet rich, right? And high skill set is, we've learned either through other people modeling it for us, or intentionally going out and going, how did you do that? Right? Tell me about every time you failed at building a business, because I want to know, right? So if we're building that skill, then that skill, we can be in that place of like, oh, I've got those skills, and they just haven't come into our reality as fruit yet. But the skills are that main thing.
Well, I think that, and also like the values, you're moving from like a shift from performative wealth to purposeful living. So, I one of my primary modalities is acceptance and commitment therapy. So we use that a lot in terms of like if we're taking this like original way of like what will people think of me if which happens a lot when you get wealth, like will people think differently of me, like will I and they start to feel it inside, and I'm like, well, is that implicit or explicit? Are they saying that, or is that more something that you're feeling inside because you are uncomfortable to that value exploration of what do I want to think of my life. I love the exercise I do so much with clients is like your 90th birthday. All your friends, family, work, colleagues, everyone's there and they're toasting you and maybe roasting you. Like, what would they say about how you chose to live your life? Like, what decisions you made, how you acted, how you behaved. It's highly likely they're not going to say, like, well, he inherited millions of dollars at this age. It's more of like, people will see you, like, how do you want to show up in this world? And that's, very driven through, like, how can we make this change? Yes, we can skill build, but, like from a macro level, who are you and how can this money help you? Like, if you do need to skill build, I have a client, we were talking about like, how can we do this, right? Like, what if we created a CEO description of, like Julie, and like you built out your own, just, role description and like the different domains of your life, work, life, leisure, relationships, and like what are the stretch goals for that in this description, and how can the money, support that? Like, how can you skill build in those areas to bring fulfillment to pieces of life that you didn't get to pay attention to because you were like, doing the grind, doing what you think that you need to do to survive, to accumulate money. So that was one kind of exercise we looked at. And I haven't had another session yet, but I'm interested to see, like, using this creativity of, look ahead and then look back. There's a gap. What do I need to build in that?
Yeah, I love that idea. So we use that kind of exercise in decluttering also, because it really does help us identify what values are important to us. And there's a meme somewhere that says, it's pretty popular. It says like, at your funeral, nobody's going to say, oh, she had great shoes and a great couch, right? They're going to say the things about the person. But when I see that, I always think, I know people that they might say that about, but it's because it points to the values that that person was sharing, right? So if I'm a person, I'm not, but if I was a person who really valued great shoes and I spent a lot of my money on great shoes, well, there's a reason for that, right? So either it's because when I wear the newest shoes, people notice me and I feel like I'm seen and valued, right? Or when I wear interesting colors, people come over and talk to me because they want it. They're interested in that, right? They're seeing that I'm an artistic person. They're seeing, and I always think about like Jennifer Aniston is pretty famous, well known for having a lot of get-togethers, right, with different people in the industry. And I'm sure her couch is fantastic for that reason, because if you value entertaining other people and hosting people and bringing people together, then you're going to value a high quality couch, right? And there's the saying that if you want to know what people care about, look at what they take photos of and what do they spend their money on. Mm-hmm. And I think that money status as a core money belief kind of has like a negative, can have a kind of negative implication. I think even when it comes to Schitt's Creek, right, there's like this idea of like, oh, they were such bad people before, right, and then they lost their money and now they're this way, and there's that transformation there. But I think that more than that, when we really think about it, money status is an attempt at connection in so many ways, right? So I think that there's a tendency to think like, well, that's, not living in values that have to do with who we are as a human, but really it is living in values as how we are as a human. So I just was really thinking about that with Schitt's Creek too, because there is, I think, and then also when it comes to sudden wealth syndrome, that's got to be really a challenge, because what are the messages that we've heard? What are the messages that even Schitt's Creek says about being wealthy, right? Who is Alexis? Who is David? Right? In the beginning, are they characters that we would care about and adore as much as the ones that live in Schitt's Creek? And so there's all these negative messages about wealth and about resources that
Mm-hmm.
that getting an inheritance like that can be so jarring. And then there's sometimes that guilt of like, I don't want to be associated, right, as a
Yeah.
person that has wealth because of all these negative things. And so I'm going to, like you said, give it away, right? I'm going to
Yeah.
take all my friends on a cruise. I'm going to donate it all. I'm going to do all of these things, which are all great uses of money as long as they're intentional uses of.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's where it causes challenges, is when it doesn't feel like an intentional use of money for something that the individual wants, but rather feels like something that they feel like they have to do.
Yeah. And that brings up, of with sudden wealth syndrome, one of the big pieces that you have to kind of grapple with is knowing who to trust and who to talk about, because talking about money in general is uncomfortable. So people, yes, can like be um, happy for you that you've inherited something, but then it kind of stops at that. And how do you now connect to these people, and how do you tell if you're single? When do you have that conversation of like, I now have a huge, like this inheritance has come to me, and there's this, I think, a hypervigilance around it. So like this financial trauma piece of like, these red flags are going up. Will people use me for money? And I like how you brought it back into the status of like, yes, you can have nice things, and that reflects like exactly like if you want to use the money to bring connection because you want to build connection in your life, and you want to host dinners, like they don't have to be opulent extravagant dinners, like it's just about building a community where you over time feel comfortable and that you have a reciprocal relationship with friends. And yeah, they may know that like, okay, you can host these, um, but that there's a level of comfort in that. Like people don't feel awkward, like, oh, it's like it's too much, or but you can make it in a way that aligns to you. And I think that's such a challenging thing of like in the financial trauma piece of like getting so activated that you're looking for things or expecting people that you won't be able to connect with people. And so therefore the isolation too of like, it's just me, I'm walking around like with this huge money, symbol on my head, and nobody sees me anymore or wants to be connected with who I truly am as a person.
And sudden wealth syndrome makes me think of too, like my husband and I are always like, well, if I win the lottery, like, what am I going to spend that money on? And it's funny, like the difference between us, where I'm like, oh, we should pay this off. And my husband's like, oh, we're going to travel and we're going to buy an RV and whatever. So I feel like it's kind of shows the two, like the difference between the core power beliefs too, of like what you think you'll do when you get that money, and like, oh, well, I'd keep my job. And he's like, I wouldn't keep my job. So
Right.
it's like funny, like the difference. Do you think like people usually stay in like that same way, or like they'll change once they do get that wealth? Or I don't know, I feel like maybe I would, but right now thinking about it, I'm like, oh no, I would stay the same as I am now. So it's interesting to think about like how much it would change once that happened.
Well, like I think, I said there's that grief period, that transition period of like, whoa, like we've just had like a massive change, and now opportunities are available to us that were there before. And it truly is like the number, like the number of wealth, right, that you get. Um, unfortunately today, like $1 million wouldn't necessarily move a dial that much, like maybe you can upgrade the house a little bit, or, like you pay off stuff and you're kind of eating through it. But like the more, like the bigger the number, that's when these bigger decisions can be made. And I think people, at least people seeking financial therapy really want to be thoughtful about it. And they've heard things, they've seen things, especially with lottery, right? I mean, you see this, like, people blow it all within a couple years. And that's a huge transcendence. I mean, if you're a blue collar worker or someone that's making just enough to be maybe either survive or a little bit more, I think you don't have the historical experience of how to keep that money stay around. And yeah, skill building 100% of, like, let's slow this down. If you receive something big, like, let's give it time to, like, work through all the things. One, the grief period, like, lottery is a little bit different. Like, that's just absolute windfall, but inheritance is a little bit different, right? So working through all that. So yeah, I mean, I think it could be personality wise. It could be these beliefs, like you said, like, oh, I'm ready to go put it all in black. Like, we could double this, like, like, here I come, world, like, I'm putting my 2 weeks in, and I don't need you to, like, hey, let's, like, build our foundation a little bit more, and, like, let's make ourselves really comfortable, and then kind of decide. So yeah, I think it's, like, kind of your personalities. Like, do you have that kind of impulsivity? Like, and I do tell my clients, like, a piece of this is for you to, like, improve your life in the short term. You don't have to do all of it, but buy something nice for yourself, like 100%. Like, there's enough to, like, manage after as well, because yeah. So I don't know. I mean, for me, I'm so in a, like, I would be like, oh yeah, this is being, like, the mortgage is done, like, like, that would be all first. And then I think some fun upgrades for sure. And then, for me with the vigilance, like, I'd be like, well, what's the percentage that we'd have to, like, add to our income for the year? I'd be like, well, how is it going to be invested so that I can, have more? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess till that I'm in it, I could be like riding a Lambo down the Pacific Coast Highway and be like, guys, come over and see me over here.
Absolutely. Yeah, Dave Ramsey always says, pause, like, please take a pause, like, catch your breath when this happens, and then build up your team of experts around you. Because if you've been in a situation previously where, like, you were doing your own taxes on TurboTax, like, you didn't have a lot of complications with that, you were, like, putting money in a savings account, you weren't doing investing, that the most important thing to do in that pause before you spend any of the money is to build up your team around you. And that's really where, Mariah, you would come in and be a part of that team, right? Find yourself an accountant that you trust, find yourself an attorney that you trust, find yourself a financial advisor that you trust, and find yourself a financial therapist or financial coach that you trust. Because that team around you, nobody is expected, especially in that situation, to automatically, instantly have all of the experience and all of the skills that would come with building up that wealth year by year and day by day and month by month. And so that pause is so important. And then building up that team of people that you can trust around you is so important. And because I think, like, if you inherit $500,000, the idea being, well, now I can spend $500,000 versus $500,000 means $20,000 of income a year, right? That's a different thought pattern that, unless you've kind of gone through the learning about that in an intentional way, nobody expects you to have that information. So you got to have that team around you.
100%. Like, that is definitely one of the big pieces I work on with clients is, like, let's take this slow, but, like, let's start asking, like, like, I pull together references. I'm always looking, like, recently it's been socially responsible investors and advisors. Again, conflicting messages there. Like, how can you invest responsibly? and not be part of something, like corporate America. Like it's almost impossible. So that there's even conflicting messages. But if you have a percentage of like, okay, this is enough to be put in, on stocks and investments that, are good for the economy, the world, all of these things. That's good. But I think this is becoming more and more a thing, especially in our market today, of like people are more interested in that. So I'm always looking for very therapeutically informed financial planners, advisors, people that can see people as a whole, can have these conversations with them, not drive them in any way, or like just be impulsive, like we need to get this stuff done. It's more like, no, we need to have the conversations, and over time it will become much more clear to you. Once you gather all this education, it's just that you've been dropped in this pot like right now, and you don't want to boil with it. You want it to like simmer, and like you get the education and you feel good about the people now here representing you, and helping you to navigate that wealth in a way that feels good to you, feels good to the world, feels good on what's important to you.
Yeah, I love that, Chrissa discussed those conversations, especially within a couple, because I know you work with couples as well, and having those conversations about, yeah, what would we do, right? And Joe and I have had that too. And I've always said, like, we'd pay all of the people that work here $100,000 a year, right? And we just keep it going, profitable or not, because we love the thing, right? And so what that in that situation would mean is like, what that tells us as a couple is like, yeah, we care about this thing. We care about this thing we're doing. And that if we had more money to add to it, then it would mean that we would keep it going, right? It would mean it would take that pressure to be financially performative off of the table, and we could just enjoy the processing of and the services that we're putting out there. And those are all values discussions. Those are helpful to have as a couple. And I remember when Joe and I were first dating, and he says this to me all the time, but my friend had gotten a new purse, and it was like a Louis Vuitton purse or something, and it was like a big deal because we were like 22. And then I remember saying to Joe, like, I'd rather have the $300 in a $3 purse than have that purse for $300, right? And that was always kind of the way that we were. But having those conversations from the start were just so important to being able to build our skills as we go and kind of come to a middle ground. Because Joe, what I would say, my husband, is money status was probably definitely one of his main ones. And it wasn't because he grew up being like, oh, we're so great that like, let us show you everything we have. It was because he grew up feeling like he didn't have money status and needed to show that he could, right? And then we came to like, don't need to show that. Who cares? Who are you trying to prove that to, right? And those discussions just being so important. So I know you have the ebook, the You, Me, and Money Couples Guide to starting building financial rhythm. I think that's such an important piece for couples to go and utilize that resource so that these discussions are happening before the windfall, right? Before the windfall, we want to know where we are. We want to know what our thoughts are and our plans together.
Yeah. And, so the boomers, right? There's going to be a massive generational wealth transfer. Like it's actually such a good time to speak of it, that this is actually happening more and more. And people will be getting money. They may not know how much, depends on how comfortable the families have been in sharing, like how much money. So people sometimes are caught off guard on how big the number is. And it is important to, as a couple, discuss, like, and eventually that there possibly will be, an inheritance. And, like you never want to rely on it, but you can also think of like kind of building that in down the road. Like some parents will choose, like, I'm spending the inheritance right now because it's my value to spend time with you. Like that could be, I rent a house near you and come visit and be supportive, or we go on family trips, or, I don't want you to stress about a house, a house, down payment for a house. Like it can represent itself in different ways. And that can almost in some capacity be a little bit easier for the ease of it than, come around like 60 or like 50 and just have like this huge chunk. And we're like, oh my gosh, I'm in no way prepared, how to do that. So I think having these conversations with couples, and maybe I'll add it in my premarital of like, yeah, this like kind of windfall, what would you do? And what kind of time frame do you want to put around it, before you start, bringing it into like the shared finances that you have. Because I do think that there is a piece of like, this is coming from two separate families. And we have to look at the money messages and the beliefs that come with it, because we don't want it necessarily to tank the marriage, but we want it to, build, like, support the family unit that you've created, in a way that, and like with Chrissa saying like, oh, I'd spend it this way or that way, like, you might feel, if that came from your side of the family, you might feel like, well, we're not spending it that way, and now we have some power dynamics that we have to work through of like, you have this money. So yeah, so conversations early often are important, and talking about how money was discussed. I always do the money story with everyone, like, what is the attachment, who was in charge of the finances, how was money discussed, was there education, were there frameworks that were used, because right, eventually you're going to have to get into some middle ground, because there's no way everyone grew up the same. I mean, that is the great thing about America. It's very diverse in how people come from. I often think of like my time when I lived in New Zealand for 7 years, and that's a very socially supported country, very socialized. So a lot of people did grow up the same way, had the same experiences, were part of sport. Everyone had access to schooling. Everyone had access to food. And it's like almost kind of like an apathetic, like there's no like these real stories of like, and maybe more so now because it's changed a little bit, but of like, hard times, like overcoming things, barriers, where you see that a lot more in the United States, just so diverse. People's stories, people's money stories are very different. And you're attracted to each other because someone, I have a couple right now, like someone's like very carefree, and the other one, like money was different in the household. And it's like, that's not easy to resolve, because that's been imprinted from day one.
Absolutely. And as a money vigilant person, right, attraction to a money status date, right, is much different than attraction to a money status husband. Because when my husband and I were dating, it was a money status thing. He was very freewheeling, right? So we go to the movie, he would pay for everything. We go to dinner, he'd pay for everything. And as a money vigilant person, I was like, this is great. But then when we started living together, when we were married and had combined finances, that dynamic shifts, because now when you buy me flowers, you bought that with my money though, right? Yeah. So, or our money. Yeah. And it hits a different way for finances. So I think it's such a great topic, and we'd love to have you back too, maybe to talk about like challenges with inheriting money and conversations that we can be having with our parents, with our children. Chrissa and I have both gone through, my father-in-law passed away several years ago, and Chrissa has gone through inheritances as well. And so I think that would be such a great topic to be able to discuss on another episode.
That sounds wonderful to me.
Yeah. So Mariah, if anybody's on the fence about starting financial therapy with a financial focus, what suggestion might you give them?
I'd say, be open, be present, do what matters. Just be open to this and understand that it is a bit of a focus. And a lot of, counselors may not necessarily feel that comfortable with it. And so, it's a little bit of a niche area, but it's such a nice blend of mental health with a focus on finances or financial expertise, that you can have these two different conversations of money and emotions and how they're interlinked, and have it creating a lens to be able to explore that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us again. And like Julie said, we'd love to have you back for a 5th episode. If you are listening and you're interested in services with Mariah, you can find her at mariahhudler.com or Koru, Koru, financialtherapy.com.
I'm Mariah Hudler, and I need a counselor.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the You Need a Counselor podcast. We are so grateful that you're here. Now, we want to hear from you. Text us or give us a call at 515-650-3231. You can also find and connect with You Need a Counselor on Facebook and Instagram. If you've enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to like, review, or leave a comment, as all of these things help others to find and benefit from the podcast as well. If you're in the state of Iowa and interested in mental health counseling or behavioral health intervention services, give us a call at 800-531-4236.